Back, philosophers. So in this week we're going to start our venture into the world of metaphysics. So in this video I'm going to explain a little bit about what exactly metaphysics is, and then explain a little bit on the question of free will, which is what we'll be focusing on this week. So metaphysics is the most abstract and general field of philosophy. So we've done some political philosophy, we've done some ethics. Philosophers sometimes do what's called epistemology, the study of knowledge. And metaphysics is the other big area of philosophy that is generally regarded as sort of the most abstract general field. So most broadly, it deals with questions about the nature of existence. So sort of what exists, why does it exist, how does it exist? And this connects to a wide range of questions about the nature of space and time, the nature of cause and effect, the nature of possibility and necessity. All these types of things are going to come into play. So one way to think about the job of the metaphysician is to create a list of all the things that exist. So if someone came to you and said, hey, here's a pad of paper and a pen, write down everything that exists and then tell me sort of why it is that it exists. And you might think it might be simple at first, oh, well, like my computer exists, this desk exists, but there's lots of much more difficult questions that metaphysicians look at. So for instance, like, does the number 2 exist? Do numbers exist? We talked about this in relation to Mackey's work in ethics before. Does Michelangelo's Pieta exist? So that's what's pictured here. But if so, does the hunk of marble that it's made of, does it exist as well? Or do just one of these things exist? Or are there two things that both take up the same amount of space? So there's difficult questions there. Questions about whether I exist, and if I exist, what exactly am I? So am I, as a person, Jonathan, am I a sort of a mind, a soul? Am I just this physical body? Am I some sort of organic connection between the mind and the body? And this leads on to the question, like, do minds exist at all? Are minds something over and above just the brain, or is the brain all there is? So metaphysicians are going to deal with all these types of difficult questions related to what things in the world actually exist. And one of the big questions is going to be the question about whether God exists, and that's the one we're going to get to next week on the question of whether God exists. So when it comes to free will and determinism, one of these big debates in metaphysics, one of the major questions when discussing free will is this relation between free will and determinism. So it seems that our being free depends on us not being determined. If everything that you've done or will do is already determined, that sort of you're determined that tomorrow you're going to eat pancakes for breakfast, it seems you're not freely choosing to eat those pancakes for breakfast. So we're going to look at a couple different views that look at different ways that free will and determinism are related. So you can see here on this little chart that there are two ways we can think about the world. So one might think that we are determined, or one might think that we are not determined, and one might think that we have free will or that we don't have free will. So if you think that we have free will but that we're still determined, you're what is called a compatibilist, because what you're saying is that free will and determinism are actually compatible. And we're going to see a little bit of some of the compatibilist idea, because Strawson will talk about in his paper that we'll read later in the week. But we're going to look in this first section at a libertarian view, which says that we do have free will, and we do have free will because we're not determined. And this form of libertarianism, right, has nothing to do with a political philosophy. It's just sort of the same name given to different positions. But it's this idea that sort of we do have free will because we're not determined. But we're also going to look at this view from Strawson, who's going to say, well, unfortunately, we are determined, and that means that we don't have any free will. So we're going to look at his view later in the week. This last view, hard indeterminism, isn't held by many people. Generally, the debate is between these three views. So what to look for when you're reading these two things? So first, look for how the philosophical notion of free will is different from sort of the common notion of free will we might use in everyday life. Kane is going to distinguish between sort of surface freedoms and sort of the more deep freedom that we consider when doing philosophical work. And second, look at the connection between free will and other important ideas, such as personhood and moral responsibility. It seems that we need freedom to undergird us as persons or to make people morally responsible. And then finally, when looking at Chisholm, see how he tries to make this libertarian view coherent, because it seems strange to say that sort of, in some sense, there's nothing that determines what you do. And so the question is, well, why do you do what you do? And Chisholm is going to try and give an explanation for that that doesn't involve us being determined by certain parts of our nature or certain physical facts about us. So dive into that, look at the reading, and get your questions in as soon as possible.